And before we start the meditation, shall we just do the same kind of reading that we were doing before, doing a page at a time? And each of us take a page, ending with a period or,
Okay.
Maybe going Jeffrey, Marco, John Robert in that order.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so here goes the meditation bell.
Canto 2, The Issue. A while, withdrawn in secret fields of thought, her mind moved in a many-imaged past that lived again and saw its end approach. Dying, it lived imperishably in her, transient and vanishing from transient eyes. Invisible, a fateful ghost of self, it bore the future on its phantom breast. Along the fleeting events' far backward trail regressed the stream of the insistent hours, and on the bank of the mysterious flood, peopled with well-loved forms, now see no more, and the subtle images of things that were, her witness spirit stood, reviewing time. All that she once had hoped and dreamed and been flew past her eagle-winged through memory's skies. As in a many-hued, flaming inner dawn, her life's broad highways and its sweet bypaths lay mapped to her sun-clear recording view. From the bright country of her childhood's days and the blue mountains of her soaring youth and the paradise groves and peacock wings of love to joy clutched under the silent shadow of doom in a last turn where heaven raced with hell. 12 passionate months led in a day of fate. An absolute supernatural darkness falls on man sometimes when he draws near to God. An hour arrives when fail all nature's means. Forced out from the protecting ignorance and flung back on his naked primal need, he at length must cast from him his surface soul and be the ungarbed entity within. That hour had fallen now on Savitri. A point she had reached where life must be in vain, or in her unborn element awake, Her will must cancel her body's destiny.
Welcome, Andrea.
Hi, good morning. Sorry, I'm a bit late. Oh, I need to close my curtains. Hi there.
Hello.
Hi, Andrea. So
Hi.
we're on page 12.
Okay.
Marco is going to read this page, and then you'll be up next. And we're reading it one page at a time, all the way through this canto.
Yeah. Thank you.
So what I'm going to do to reestablish the continuity with what Jeffrey just read is hop back a few lines to we're beginning on the first page of the canto, on man sometimes when he draws near to God, and then continue on until the beginning of, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines into page 13 on this edition. On man sometimes when he draws near to God, an hour arrives when fail all nature's means. Forced out from the protecting ignorance and flung back on his naked primal need, he at length must cast from him his surface soul and be the ungarbed entity within. That hour had fallen now on Savitri. That hour had fallen now on Savitri, a point she had reached where life must be in vain, or in her unborn element awake, her will must cancel her body's destiny. For only the unborn spirit's timeless power can lift the yoke imposed by birth in time. Only the self that builds this figure of self can raise the fixed, interminable line that joins these changing names, these numberless lives, these new oblivious personalities, and keeps still lurking in our conscious acts the trail of old forgotten thoughts and deeds. Disown the legacy of our buried selves, the burdensome heirship to our vanished forms, accepted blindly by the body and soul. An episode in an unremembered tale, its beginning lost, its motive and plot concealed. A once living story has prepared and made our present fate, child of past energies. The fixity of the cosmic sequences, fastened with hidden, inevitable links, she must disrupt, dislodge by her soul's force her past, a block on the immortal's road, make a raised ground and shape anew her fate. A colloquy of the original gods, meeting upon the borders of the unknown, her soul's debate with embodied nothingness must be wrestled out on a dangerous, dim background. Her being must confront its formless cause, against the universe weigh its single self. On the bare peak where self is alone with naught, and life has no sense and love no place to stand. She must plead her case upon extinction's verge. In the world's death cave, uphold life's helpless claim, and vindicate her right to be and love. Altered must be nature's harsh economy. A quittance she must win from her past's bond, an old account of suffering exhaust. Strike out from time the soul's long compound debt, and the heavy servitudes of the karmic gods, the slow revenge of unforgiving law, and the deep need of universal pain and hard sacrifice and tragic consequence.
Out of a timeless barrier she must break, penetrate with her thinking depths the void's monstrous hush, look into the lonely eyes of immortal death, and with her nude spirit measure the infinite's night. The great and dolorous moment was now close. A mailed battalion marching to its doom, the last long days went by with heavy tramp, long but too soon to pass, too near the end. Alone amid the many faces loved, aware among unknowing happy hearts, her armored spirit kept watch upon the hours, listening for a foreseen tremendous step in the closed beauty of the inhuman wilds. A combatant in silent, dreadful lists, the world unknowing, for the world she stood. No helper had she, save the strength within. There was no witness of terrestrial eyes. The gods above and nature soul below were the spectators of that mighty strife. Around her were the austere sky-pointing hills, and the green murmurous broad deep-thoughted woods muttered incessantly their muffled spell. A dense, magnificent, colored, self-wrapped life, draped in the leaves' vivid emerald monotone, and set with checkered sunbeams and blithe flowers, immured her destiny's secluded scene. There had she grown to the stature of her spirit, the genius of titanic silences, steeping her soul in its wide loneliness, had shown to her herself's bare reality and mated her with her environment.
Its solitude greatened her human hour, ground the eternal and unique. Of spare, direct necessity reduced the heavy framework of man's days and his overburdening mass of outward needs to a first thin strip of simple animal wants and the mighty wildness of the primitive earth and the brooding multitude of patient trees and the musing sapphire leisure of the sky and the solemn weight of the slowly passing months had left in her deep room for thought in God. There was her drama's radiant prologue lived, a spot for the eternal's tread on earth, set in the cloistral yearning of the woods, and watched by the aspiration of the peaks, peered through an aureate opening in time, where stillness, listening, felt the unspoken word, and the hours forgot to pass towards grief and change. Here, with the suddenness divine advents have, repeating the marvel of the first descent, changing to rapture the dull earthly round. Love came to her, hiding the shadow, death. Well might he find in her his perfect shrine. Since first the earth being's heavenward growth began, through all the long ordeal of the race, never a rarer creature bore his shaft, that burning test of the Godhead in our parts, a lightning from the heights on our abyss. All in her pointed to a nobler kind, near to earth's wideness, intimate with heaven, exalted and swift, her young, large vision spirit, voyaging tender and of calm, overflew the ways of thought to unborn things. Ardent was her self-poised, unstumbling will. Her mind, a sea of white sincerity, passionate in flow, had not one turbid wave.
As in a mystic and dynamic dance, a priestess of immaculate ecstasies inspired and ruled from truth's revealing vault, moves in some prophet cavern of the gods. A heart of silence in the hands of joy, inhabited with rich creative beats, a body like a parable of dawn that seemed a niche for veiled divinity or golden temple door to things beyond. Immortal rhythms swayed in her time-born steps. Her look, her smile, awoke celestial sense, even in earth stuff, and their intense delight poured as supernal beauty on men's lives. A wide self-giving was her native act, a magnanimity as of sea or sky, enveloped with its greatness all that came and gave a sense as of a greatened world. Her kindly care was a sweet, temperate sun, her high passion, a blue heaven's equipoise, as might a soul fly like a hunted bird, escaping with tired wings from a world of storms, and a quiet reach like a remembered breast, in a haven of safety and splendid soft repose, one could drink life back in streams of honey fire, recover the lost habit of happiness, feel her bright nature's glorious ambience, and preen joy in her warmth and colors rule. A deep of compassion, a hushed sanctuary. Her inward help unbarred a gate in heaven. Love in her was wider than the universe, and the whole world could take refuge in her single heart. The great unsatisfied Godhead here could dwell, vacant of the dwarf self's imprisoned air. Her mood could harbor his sublimer breath, spiritual, that can make all things divine. For even her gulfs were secrecies of light. At once she was the stillness and the word, a continent of self-diffusing peace, an ocean of untrembling virgin fire. The strength, the silence of the gods were hers. In her, he found a vastness like his own, his high, warm, subtle ether, he refound and moved in her as in his natural home. In her he met his own eternity.
Till then, no mournful line had barred this ray. On the frail breast of this precarious earth, since her orbed sight in its breath-fastened house, opening in sympathy with happier stars, where life is not exposed to sorrowful change. Remembered beauty, death-claimed lids ignore, and wondered at this world of fragile forms, carried on canvas strips of shimmering time. The impunity of unborn mites was hers. Although she learned to bear the human load, her walk kept still the measures of the gods. Earth's breath had failed to stain that brilliant glass. Unsmeared with the dust of our mortal atmosphere, it still reflected heaven's spiritual joy. Almost they saw who lived within her light, her playmate in the sempiternal spheres, descended from its unattainable realms, in her attracting Advent's luminous wake, the white fire dragon bird of endless bliss, drifting with burning wings above her days. Heaven's tranquil shield guarded the missioned child. A glowing orbit was her early term, years like gold raiment of the gods that pass. Her youth sat throned in calm felicity, but joy cannot endure until the end. There is a darkness in terrestrial things that will not suffer long too glad a note.
On her too closed the inescapable hand. The armed immortal bore the snare of time. One dealt with her who meets the burdened great, a signer of the ordeal and the path, who chooses in his holocaust of the soul, death, fall, and sorrow as his spirit's goads. The dubious Godhead with his torch of pain lit up the chasm of the unfinished world, and called her to fill with her vast self the abyss. August and pitiless in his calm outlook, heightening the eternal's dreadful strategy, he measured the difficulty with the might, and dug more deep the gulf that all must cross. Assailing her divinest element, he made her heart kin to the striving human heart, and forced her strength to its appointed road. For this she had accepted mortal breath. To wrestle with the shadow she had come, and must confront the riddle of man's birth, and life's brief struggle in dumb matter's night. Whether to bear with ignorance and death, or hew the ways of immortality, to win or lose the godlike game for man, was her soul's issue thrown with destiny's dice. But not to submit and suffer was she born. To lead, to deliver was her glorious part. Here was no fabric of terrestrial make, fit for a day's use by busy, careless powers. An image fluttering on the screen of fate, half animated for a passing show, or a castaway on the ocean of desire, flung to the eddies in a ruthless sport, and tossed along the gulfs of circumstance, a creature born to bend beneath the yoke, a chattel and a plaything of time's lords, or one more pawn who comes destined to be pushed one slow move forward on a measureless board, in the chess play of the earth's soul with doom. Such is the human figure drawn by time.
A conscious frame was here, a self-born force. In this enigma of the dusk of God, this slow and strange, uneasy compromise of limiting nature with a limitless soul, where all must move between entered chance and an uncaring blind necessity. Too high the fire spiritual dare not blaze. If once it met the intense original flame, an answering touch might shatter all measures made, and earth sink down with the weight of the infinite. A jail is this immense material world. Across each road stands armed a stone-eyed law. At every gate, the huge dim sentinels pace. A gray tribunal of the ignorance, an inquisition of the priests of night in judgment sit on the adventurer soul. And the dual tables and the karmic norm restrain the titan in us and the God. Pain with its lash, joy with its silver bribe, guard the wheel's circling immobility. A bond is put on the high climbing mind, a seal on the too large, wide open heart. Death stays the journeying discoverer life. Thus is the throne of the unconscious safe, while the tardy coilings of the eons pass, and the animal browses in the sacred fence, and the gold hawk can cross the skies no more. But one stood up and lit the limitless flame. Arraigned by the dark power that hates all bliss in the dire court where life must pay for joy. Sentenced by the mechanic justicer to the afflicting penalty of man's hopes. Her head she bowed not to the stark decree, bearing her helpless heart to destiny's stroke. Her head she bowed not to the stark decree, bearing her helpless heart to destiny's stroke.
So bows and must the mind-born will in man, obedient to the statutes fixed of old, admitting without appeal the nether gods. In her the superhuman cast its seed. Inapt to fold its mighty wings of dream, her spirit refused to hug the common soil, or, finding all life's golden meanings robbed, compound with earth, struck from the starry list, or quench with black despair the God-given light. Accustomed to the eternal and the true, her being conscious of its divine founts asked not from mortal frailty pain's relief, patched not with failure, bargain, or compromise, a work she had to do, a word to speak, writing the unfinished story of her soul in thoughts and actions graved in nature's book. She accepted not to close the luminous page, cancel her commerce with eternity, or set a signature of weak assent to the brute balance of the world's exchange. A force in her that toiled since earth was made, accomplishing in life the great world's plan, pursuing after death immortal aims, repugned to admit frustration's barren role, forfeit the meaning of her birth in time, obey the government of the casual fact, or yield her high destiny up to passing chance. In her own self, she found her high recourse. She matched with the iron law her sovereign right. Her single will opposed the cosmic rule.
To stay the wheels of doom, this greatness rose. At the unseen's knock upon her hidden gates, her strength made greater by the lightning's touch, awoke from slumber in her heart's recess. It bore that the stroke of that which kills and saves. Across the awful march no eye can see, barring its dreadful route, no will can change. She faced the engines of the universe. A heart stood in the way of the driving wheels. Its giant workings paused in front of a mind. Its stark conventions met the flame of a soul. A magic leverage suddenly is caught that moves the veiled ineffable's timeless will. A prayer, a master act, a king idea can link man's strength to a transcendent force. Then miracle is made the common rule. One mighty deed can change the course of things. A lonely thought becomes omnipotent. All now seems nature's massed machinery, an endless servitude to material rule, and long determination's rigid chain, her firm and changeless habits aping law, her empire of unconscious deft device, annul the claim of man's free human will. He too is a machine amid machines. A piston brain pumps out the shapes of thought. A beating heart cuts out emotion's modes. An insentient energy fabricates a soul. Or the figure of the world reveals the signs of a tide chance repeating her old steps in circles around matter's binding posts. A random series of inept events to which reason lends elusive sense is here, or the empiric life's instinctive search, or a vast ignorant mind's colossal work. But wisdom comes, and vision grows within. Then nature's instrument crowns himself her king. He feels his witnessing self and conscious power. His soul steps back and sees the light supreme. His soul steps back and sees the light supreme.
Andrea, you're mute.
Sorry, thank you. A Godhead stands behind the brute machine. This truth broke in a triumph of fire. A victory was won for God in man. the deity revealed its hidden face. The great world mother now in her arose. A living choice reversed fate's cold dead turn, affirmed the spirit's tread on circumstance, pressed back the senseless dire revolving wheel, and stopped the mute march of necessity. A flaming warrior from the eternal peaks, empowered to force the door denied and closed, smote from death's visage its dumb absolute, and burst the bounds of consciousness and time. End of Canto 2.
So we finished the first two cantos. Anybody have anything to say or reflection about this canto before we head on?
No, just that it's made such a good sense to read it all through as one chunk instead of breaking it up, because it gives such a different sense from the whole after we've sort of dug into it. So I enjoyed that.
Andrea, Mateo's not feeling well. That's why he's not here today.
I gather.
I did have one small question. On page 18, there are the lines, an inquisition of the priests of night in judgment sit on the adventurer's soul, and the dual tables and the karmic norm restrain the titan in us and the god. And I'm wondering what the dual tables are.
Yeah, I've wondered about that too. I don't know of any official pronouncement, but I think of it as the tables of the Mosaic Law. In other words, the principle of morality, which is a dualistic principle. And it kind of goes along with the karmic norm, which can also be a dualistic kind of thing, a tit for tat kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But that's just my own interpretation. And the dual tables and the karmic norm restrain the titan in us. So morality does have that function to restrain the worst in us and try to promote the best. It's just that it can't deal with all these, with death and with the seeming appearance of nature as a machine and ourselves as determined and all the rest of that. Anybody else have an idea about that?
I think the language is very strong, and I like it. An inquisition of the priests of night. There's this kind of cosmic battle, it seems, or sort of war, sort of opposition that is set up here between this mechanistic universe, this massive compulsion to I suppose from all the way from matter up to even in the human sphere, the moral law, the natural law and the moral law, as combining to restrain an inner infinite, the expression of an infinite from within, which I see what I saw more clearly through the second reading is that the complete arc of that, and the way that Savitri is almost like in marriage, right? Like saving herself for a greater possibility. She's not consenting to go along with the program, if you will, the what nature would dictate, for her, or what humanity, what human institutions would dictate for her. And there's this great act of defiance in this gesture, it seems, where she's defying the inquisitors of the night. She's defying, but then she sees at the end of this that great machine, that a Godhead stands behind the brute machine, and this truth broke in a triumph of fire. So there's like a transmutation of what is perceived to be an agent of blind, inconscient, even evil, perhaps, machinery, and that being kind of becoming available, to her, to transfigure, perhaps, to recast in the light of her love, and of her divine love, and her affirmation of her right to be. So I think it's great. And I did, as I mentioned earlier, read ahead to 3, and then in a way that becomes the masculine counterpart to this like liberation of, or the preservation and the liberation of the soul, to then join in a union. So I was glad to see the coherence of that and the continuity of that story. And I find the language very strong, very, very, very suggestive. And even as I've read on, it sort of builds as the images accumulate. So I think those are my reflections on this canto.
Yeah, I love the way you put that, Marco. It sounds prophetic to me. As we go through the whole epic, you will see that many of those things played out, that you said. And that Sri Aurobindo, of course, is talking about here, but since we're just at the beginning, we don't know all the implications of what he's saying. But you're catching a lot of it.
Shall we make
Anybody
a start
else?
on Canto 3, or I guess we have
I'm all
some
for
time.
it.
I guess we have some time.
So before we start Canto 3, I just want to point out one thing. In Canto 3, the first line, "A world's desire compelled her mortal birth," reflects back to Cantos 1 and 2. And then the next line, and from then on, is about the yoga of the king, the yoga of the soul's release. The king is Savitri's father, Aswapati. And Sri Aurobindo will not name him for a long time. There'll be many pages go by before Sri Aurobindo ever names him. But as Marco noticed, the pronouns in this section start becoming he. And Sri Aurobindo first calls him a thinker and toiler in the ideal's air. And that's about 6 lines down from there. So we're going to be going into Ashwapati's yoga now. This is before Savitri is born. So we're now time traveling back to kind of the origins of the prayer for a portion of the Divine Mother to come and help humanity. And this is the beginning of that part of the drama.
But before we begin,
Yes,
I'm wondering if we might restructure how much we read,
sure.
And since there are about 4 pages here, a little over 4 pages before a break, the line break,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we could read to there and then reflect back on what we just read. Make sure that, like, give ourselves a chance to check in with questions or thoughts.
Would you all like to try that?
Sure.
Okay. And what about stopping the person reading if you have a burning question, or do you want to save your questions until that part is done?
I would prefer to save my questions. But if somebody would want to stop me while I'm reading, that would be okay.
Andrea, would you like to start? You just had a small portion of that last
Yes, I would.
canto.
I would. Canto 3. I'm on?
Yes, you're
Canto
on.
3. The Yoga of the King, the Yoga of the Soul's Release. A world's desire compelled her mortal birth. One in the front of the immemorial quest, protagonist of the mysterious play in which the unknown pursues himself through forms and limits his eternity by the hours, and the blind void struggles to live and see, a thinker and toiler in the ideal's air, brought down to earth's dumb need her radiant power. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres into our province of ephemeral sight, a colonist from immortality. A pointing beam on earth's uncertain roads, his birth held up a symbol and a sign. His human self, like a translucent cloak, covered the all-wise who leads the unseeing world. Affiliated to cosmic space and time, and paying here God's debt to earth and man, a greater sonship was his divine right. Although consenting to mortal ignorance, his knowledge shared the light ineffable. A strength of the original permanence, entangled in the moment and its flow, he kept the vision of the vasts behind. A power was in him from the unknowable, an archivist of the symbols of the beyond, a treasurer of superhuman dreams. He bore the stamp of mighty memories and shed their grandiose ray on human life. His days were long growth to the supreme, a skyward being nourishing its roots on sustenance from occult spiritual founts, climbed through white rays to meet an unseen sun.
You could continue until the break there, Andrea, on page
Oh, you want me to read the whole thing?
26. Is that what
okay.
you meant?
No, I meant that we would each take one page and then collectively take a break.
Oh, okay. I got it. Let's see.
Okay, so Robert, John Robert.
His soul lived as eternity's delegate. His mind was like a fire assailing heaven. His will a hunter in the trails of light. An ocean impulse lifted every breath. Each action left the footprints of a god. Each moment was it of puissant wings. The little plot of our mortality, touched by this tenant from the heights, came a playground of the living infinite. This bodily appearance is not all. The form deceives. The person is a mask. Hid deep in man, celestial powers can dwell. His fragile ship conveys through the sea of years an incognito of the imperishable. A spirit that is a flame of God abides, a fiery portion of the wonderful, artist of his own beauty and delight, immortal in our mortal poverty. This sculptor of the forms of the infinite, this screened, unrecognized inhabitant, initiate of his own veiled mysteries, hides in a small, dumb seed his cosmic thought. In the mute strength of the occult idea, determining predestined shape and act, passenger from life to life, from scale to scale, changing his image self from form to form. He regards the icon growing by his gaze, and in the worm foresees the coming God. At last the traveler in the paths of time arrives on the frontiers of eternity. In the transient symbol of humanity draped, he feels his substance of undying self and loses his kinship to mortality. A beam of the eternal smites his heart. His thought stretches into infinitude. All in him turns to spirit vastnesses.
His soul breaks out to join the oversoul. His life is oceaned by that super life. He is drunk from the breasts of the mother of the worlds. A topless supernature fills his frame. She adopts his spirit's everlasting ground as the security of her changing world and shapes the figure of her unborn mites. Immortally she conceives herself in him. In the creature, the unveiled creatrix works. Her face is seen through his face, her eyes through his eyes. Her being is his through a vast identity. Then is revealed in man the overt divine. A static oneness and dynamic power descend in him. The integral Godhead's seals. His soul and body take that splendid stamp. A long, dim preparation is man's life, a circle of toil and hope and war and peace tracked out by life on matter's obscured ground. In his climb to a peak, no feet have ever trod. He seeks through a penumbra shot with flame, a veiled reality half known, ever missed, a search for something or someone never found, cult of an ideal never made real here, an endless spirit of ascent and fall until at last is reached the giant point through which his glory shines, for whom we were made, and we break into the infinity of God. Across our nature's borderline, and we break into the infinity of God. Across our borders, across our nature's borderline, we escape into supernature's arc of living light. This now was witnessed in that son of force. In him that high transition laid its base.
Original and supernal immanence, of which all nature's process is the art, The cosmic worker set his secret hand to turn this frail mud engine to heaven use. A presence wrought behind the ambiguous screen. It beat his toil to bear a titan's weight, refining half-hewn blocks of natural strength. It built his soul into a statued god. The craftsman of the magic stuff of self, who labors at his high and difficult plan in the wide workshop of the wonderful world, modeled in inward time his rhythmic parts. Then came the abrupt transcendent miracle. The masked immaculate grandeur could outline, at travail in the occult womb of life, his dreamed magnificence of things to be. A crown of the architecture of the worlds, a mystery of married earth and heaven, annexed divinity to the mortal scheme. A seer was born, a shining guest of time. For him, mind's limiting firmament ceased above. In the griffin forefront of the night and day, a gap was rent in the all-concealing vault. The conscious ends of being went rolling back. The landmarks of the little person fell. The island ego joined its continent. Overpast was this world of rigid limiting forms. Life's barriers opened into the unknown. Abolished were the conceptions, covenants, and, striking off subjection's rigorous clause, annulled the soul's treaty with nature's nescience. All the gray inhibitions were torn off, and broken the intellect's hard and lustrous lid. Truth unpartitioned found immense sky room. An Empyrean vision saw and knew. The bounded mind became a boundless light. The finite self mated with infinity. His march now soared into an eagle's flight. Out of apprenticeship to ignorance, wisdom unpraised him to her master craft, and made him an arch mason of the soul, a builder of the immortal's secret house, an aspirant to supernal timelessness. Freedom and empire called to him from on high. Above mind's twilight and life's star-led night, there gleamed the dawn of a spiritual day. Shall we pause there for a moment?
Sure.
So I noticed that the voice is very different here. The rhythms aren't the same either as the first section. I think the language is a bit more abstract, and the rhythm is broken up, especially in the first page. It's broken up. It starts to get a bit more fluid after, but the way the words are picked, they break up the rhythms a bit more.
Would you give us an example or two, Jeffrey?
I just noticed it when we were reading that first page. Let's see if I can find something. And the blind void struggles to live, and see the struggles in the word breaks up the rhythm, so it doesn't have so quite the rhythmic. It puts the emphasis on struggle instead of on the, so it breaks up the, anyway, just to, covered the all wise, so that's another because we put the emphasis on all and wise, it breaks up the rhythm. Does that help?
I see he covered the all wise. Where was the other one that you mentioned?
It was just a bit earlier. The fifth line down, and the blind void struggles. Even and limits. Well, anyway, some of it. I just noticed it was more a kind of a rhythm thing, a bit subtle.
I'll look for it. I had never noticed that before.
Well, I do think this canto is coming from a different voice, right? Or it's speaking of a different movement, whereas the previous one is that of Savitri's awakening. This one is about her father, and I didn't know that when I first read it. I thought it might have been Satyavan, but it's the more masculine mode, and that masculine is becoming incarnated. It's coming into the earthly form in order to, as I understand the story, give birth then to, or become father to Savitri, and then she is in him. She is where she's his greater sonship, in a sense, and then on the next page, 24, it says that immortally she conceives herself in him. In the creature, the unveiled creatrix works. Her face is seen through his face, her eyes through his eyes. Her being is his through a vast identity. So it's like the prehistory of Savitri. She's already contained in the Father. Here is what I'm. And so it's a whole different movement. It's really coming from the most abstract, from the pure idea, toward the manifest realm, whereas Savitri is coming from the longing, the desire, from the love principle, and then, as I understood the last canto, like preparing herself to join with her beloved. So I'm seeing the family dynamics, I guess, here, and the archetypal, the differences in archetypal energies or principles that Aurobindo is setting up in the narrative. But I think it may also be reflected in the language, certainly in the gender of expressions, the masculine versus the feminine emphasis, and maybe as well in the rhythm, as you're pointing out, Jeffrey.
I had a question on, I think it's on the first page, affiliated to cosmic space and time and paying here God's debt to earth and man, a greater sonship was his divine right. So I'm trying to understand this idea of a greater sonship. If we're talking about the Father, how does the sonship fit in there?
My understanding is that it talks about the human being as created by God, which the children of God, that we should have a greater sonship, which is our divine right, because that's where we come from, but it's covered. And God actually owes a debt to earth and man. It's like we were cheated out of instant Godhead beingness, something like that. That's how I understand that.
Thank you.
Right before that, those lines that you pointed out, Jeffrey, Sri Aurobindo says, his birth held up a symbol and a sign. His human self, like a translucent cloak, covered the all-wise who leads to the unseen world. So it's like, instead of being an opaque cloak, in this being, it was already becoming translucent. And so that by the fact that the indwelling power and presence and light was becoming more visible, his sonship to the Creator was greater. And it's like he's getting closer to the promise, the divine right, which is the promise that all is one. Everything is that.
Okay, I think I get it now. So it's his relationship with God as God's son, the Father's relationship to God as God's son, as it were. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting that he has a kind of literary character. He's an archivist of the symbols of the beyond and a treasurer of superhuman dreams, and that he bears the stamp of mighty memories, which I think is part of what great literature carries for us through time. And then there's this long growth process that he goes through, this long growth to the supreme. I wondered, one question I have, and this is a kind of open-ended question, so we don't have to go down any rabbit holes, but just something that I'm wondering about and trying to keep in mind as I read is, here's how I would state it. To what degree or in what ways is this text a poetic autobiography? And where are the edges of that? Right. But
I think there are no edges there. This is him. This is Sri Aurobindo. And I really love this, where was it? The translucent, this human self like a translucent cloak. It's like, to me, when I see photographs of Sri Aurobindo, he embodies, I mean, if there was ever an embodiment of God, that would be Sri Aurobindo in my seeing. And so his human self is, it's there, but he is translucent. He's translucent to the divine. You can see it. That's my feeling about that.
if I may ask a corollary question, to what degree is it also then, therefore, the story of the mother?
He calls it, what does he call it? A legend and a symbol. So the legend refers back to the old legend, and the symbol is a symbol of them. It brings them in these words, in these symbols to us. Very much so. Yeah.
So Sri Aurobindo said that he never wrote anything that he didn't experience. And he wrote a lot about poetry and the meaning of poetry. And Savitri is said to be mantric poetry. So in that sense, in the sense of mantra, it's the sound, the rhythm, the images are conveying some kind of experience. And so I think in that sense, it's pretty safe to say we're talking about Sri Aurobindo's experience here. Whether, you know, it relates to some particular outer event in his life is really not the question, but whether it relates to his inner experiences and his inner openings and his inner realizations. He said that himself. He didn't say, "Oh, Ashwapati is me." He just said everything he wrote was from his own experiences. And he also said that he wrote this poem, this epic, intending to see how far art, in this case poetry, can express and elevate one's own inner sadhana. And so he was consciously doing that with this writing. And the mother said, she said he used to read to her when he would write at night, and in the morning he would hand to her the pages that he'd written at night, and she said she would look at them and she would think, that's just what I was been going through. And then she said specifically, it's not like, oh, we talked about my experience. He also said that they had the same consciousness. He said that explicitly. So how much we can take it in, you know, in kind of human terms, ordinary terms of he was writing about the mother. He was certainly writing about the divine feminine in that section. And he was writing about the divine Purusha, the divine masculine, and writing about Ashwapati, and also about Satyavan.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
I also like to point out that here in this canto, and often, so Sri Aurobindo will be talking about one of the characters. Here he's talking about Ashwapati. And then he will begin, sometimes it's very clear where he's jumping from the individual to the universal. He'll be talking about humankind or something like that. And other times he just widens the language and the experience and opens up the images so that you get a sense that he's not just talking about this one individual, but he's talking about this one individual as a representative of something much more universal.
I thought the language that alludes to the British colonization of India was interesting, where he calls or names the king the colonist from immortality, and then later at the very end of the section we read, freedom and empire called to him from on high. And I thought it was interesting how he transposed the terms from the political realm into the spiritual. I wonder if he sees even some, I don't know, does he see some overlap in the British and India as kind of aspects of different principles in the cosmic scheme?
He did have some interesting things to say about England and about India. He said that India was the psychic being of the world, the soul of the world, the soul principle of the world. And in one of his writings, in fact, it might even be Future Poetry, he talked about the British character. I'm not sure whether it's there or whether it's in his book on human unity. I can't remember where it is. but he talked about the British character. And he said there was really no spirituality in the British character. There was a strong, vital, a power with matter and creating with matter. I don't know whether he saw them as, especially the British, as a, comparable to one of these universal forces that he's talking about here or not. But it's interesting that you raise those examples that could be reflections of his experience as a freedom fighter against the British.
There's something of identifying with with power, and that taking one expression in the realm of history and earthly affairs, and then another, same words but different expression in the spiritual.
Yeah, well, let's see if that plays out more as we go through it, because it's interesting thought.
Yeah, I do have to leave at the bottom of the hour shortly thereafter. I can't go too much longer because I have a meeting coming up at the top. So maybe we should not read any further.
This might be a good place to stop then, huh?
I would like to stop, but I just want to read this one passage that was part of my reading, but I love it so much I want to read it again.
Please.
And it's this part where the words talk about reaching a higher level, but what's discussed goes through a series of ups and downs as you read it. So, and he talks about that. So, in his climb to a peak no feet have ever trod, he seeks through a penumbra shot with flame, a veiled reality half known, ever missed, a search for something or someone never found, cult of an ideal never made real here, an endless spiral of ascent and fall, until at last it is reached the giant point, through which his glory shines, for whom we were made, and we break into the infinity of God. It's such a gorgeous passage because it has the same ups and downs that he's talking about. So there's a mapping of form and content there that's really interesting.
If you haven't had a chance to look at some of Sri Aurobindo's sonnets, they're absolutely glorious. They're really something. They're in his collected poems.
I'll look that up. Shall we do a meditation to finish up today?
Oh, good idea.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Till next time.
Bye-bye.
One, lovely to be with you.
Likewise. Bye.